We did a pretty good job of getting ourselves situated to this next forum. So if I could get you to take your seats, and again, we'll get started on this next educational opportunity. If you enjoy learning about local government, today's the day for you in Brookings. I won't even heard my good joke. All right. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Andy Foberg. I'm the president and CEO of the SDSU Alumni Association. We are shifting gears today to talk about our city charter and some upcoming changes. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this, and we'll kind of dive right in, and I will let our two distinguished guests introduce themselves and then get into a presentation to kind of get us prepared. If you have questions, again, go ahead and write those down, but they may come to you post-presentation. So thank you both very much for joining us this morning. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, there we go. Thank you all for coming. I have a question for you. How many of you, before this process started, knew Brookings had a city constitution? Wow, that's great. You knew more than I did. But anyway, my name is David Gilbertson, and I'm retired now, but in my working years, I was the Chief Justice of the South Dakota Supreme Court. And with me today as a co-presenter is Dr. Lisa Hager, a professor in political science from South Dakota State University. There's a key date I want to advise you of before we get into our presentation, and that is April 8th. That's the date of the election, when the people of the city of Brookings will decide whether they want to approve the proposed draft of the city charter or continue with the existing one. And that is the same day, as I understand it, you will vote for any contests for city council or school district. So please keep that in mind. It's an important issue, and we hope that you'll come out and vote. A minute, maybe of background. Brookings is a home rule city government, and it became that in 2002. Well, what's a home rule charter? It is simply the focus of the authority granted to the city. Ordinarily, under South Dakota law, a city can only do what the state law specifically says they can do. So in other words, if it doesn't say, city, you can do this, you can't. The state constitution was amended several years ago to reverse that, in essence to allow the city government to do anything that was not outright prohibited by the state law, thus granting the city a lot more leeway in how it ran its city government. And Brookings became a home rule city in 2002 with the adoption of the charter, which is still in effect. This allows the current form of government. A constitution is really a governing document. It is a previous South Dakota Supreme Court justice defined it. It's the mother law. It tells you what you can in general terms do and cannot do, and from that you get the city government's authority to pass ordinances and resolutions and things like that. The city council was concerned that the current home rule charter was getting out of date. A lot of it simply was no longer needed. It was transition language from how we transitioned to the old form of city government in 2002 to the new form of city government after the charter was approved. That language is still in there. Obviously, it's not needed anymore. The transition is long behind us. So they created a commission to study the updating of the city charter, and the commission appointed by the city, or the council appointed the city, our commission, that consists of me as the chair, Dr. Hager, the vice chair, Dr. Robert Burns, former Mayor Gail Robertson, former Mayor Keith Corbett, former legislator Roger Solman, Jeannie Manzer, Diane Nagy, Van Fishback, and Tom Weisseth. We held 7 public meetings over the summer and this fall, and at each meeting we reviewed various aspects of the charter. We looked at a lot of other municipalities around the country that were home rule and looked at how they handled things. We were assisted in our studies by the city manager, his staff, city attorney, city clerk, and had guidance from the city council. And the overall goals of our commission was to produce an updated draft which would enhance the clarity of the charter language, align this document with current community values, remove transitional language from the 2002 document, which is no longer needed, update outdated terminology, and include language reflecting current and best practices. We presented this proposed draft after these 7 meetings, and these were public meetings, and members of the public did attend and have input. We presented the draft to the City Council for their consideration. After further discussion, we brought back a somewhat revised draft with a few tweaks, and that was approved in January and February of this year. And that made the next move, which is now before the electorate, and that's the April election. The question is simply, do you want to approve the new city charter, or do you not want to approve it, and then you would thus continue with the existing charter. Now, maybe one final comment, too, that even though the charter is up for election, it's not set in stone. It can be amended in several ways in the future. It can be simply 15 people can bring a petition asking for an election. And the City Council, on its own initiative, can bring forth a proposed for the electorate to vote on, and initiative and referendum also apply. So this is where we're at, and I will then turn it over to my Vice Chair, Dr. Hager, and she will give you a brief summary of the actual contents of what's in the charter. Dr. Hager?
Thank you. So I think one thing to keep in mind as we are going through the general changes that we did suggest for the charter is to think about how this is broadly laying out the powers of the city. So we'll have some handouts that will get passed out here, but you'll see that it mimics a lot of what you see in the articles of the U.S. Constitution, where it's going through general powers and specific bodies, such as City Council and also our different departments and offices. So anything more specific that you may want to see would more likely come through an ordinance or the equivalent of, act of Congress, if we're kind of thinking at the federal level. At least that's how I tend to think, given my expertise in American political institutions and constitutional law. So obviously, when I was asked to serve on the City Charter Review Commission, I was like, of course, this is my chance to nerd out on essentially a Constitution-type document. So as far as the changes go, we really didn't make any sort of drastic changes. The initial charter commission did a really nice job giving us a charter that was grounded in the model city charter that's put out by the National Civic League. So all of us received this nice booklet that gave us all these different types of suggestions for city charters, especially city charters that are similar to communities that are the size of Brookings. And so with that, we were just trying to update language to ensure that things were working the way they are currently now. So to just kind of go through those, we were adding more clarity with respect to the roles, responsibilities, and processes that are taking place within the city. And so we can talk through more of those specifically, especially during the FAQ. But we're just trying to ensure that who's performing certain duties is reflected in the charter, that their responsibilities are fully laid out, the processes that are supposed to take place are detailed accordingly. We also wanted to add some language to reflect values of the community. In particular, we wanted it to be clear that we wanted inclusive community participation. And so what we're hoping to encourage is that all members of Brookings will have an opportunity to have their voices heard by the different offices, departments, and bodies within the city government. So we want it to be, retired people, students, young professionals, everywhere, everybody in between. And so a lot of language that would encourage that type of participation. So, trying to find public meeting times that work for a variety of folks, for instance. So it's still relatively vague, and everyone can interpret that how it would work best for them, but to really ensure that that sort of principle was in here. Like the Chief Justice mentioned, we were removing the outdated language relating to the transition to a city manager form of government. There's no need for it, just clean it up. We also ensured that there was the removal of outdated language. So one example that we were noticing was the use of handicap, where we would instead prefer to use the term disabled. Another example would be when we're talking about ensuring that information is distributed to the public. Oftentimes it was getting talked about in terms of print media, but obviously now social media and other forms of digital media would be helpful. And then additional new language was added to reflect current and best practices. So some of these things relating to how the city manager is overseeing different roles and responsibilities from some of our other city employees. So this kind of goes into more detail of some of the things that I have been talking about. So specifically where we find the discussion of inclusive community participation, that's in the preamble, really just setting the stage for the city charter. And then throughout the document, we just try to call out the importance of greater public engagement. Kind of looking at some of these specific issues relating to different roles and responsibilities within the city, we clarified the city clerk and city attorney appointment procedure. And so how we're having that work is very similar to what you're seeing with respect to our cabinet secretaries at the federal level, where you have the president making that nomination with advice and consent from the Senate. And so how we're having that happen here is where the city manager is working in consultation with the city council to find the appropriate person to serve as city clerk and city attorney. With that, we then clarified the city manager's supervisory role of the city clerk and the city attorney. So obviously those two individuals serve city council, and they're also here on a regular basis, so they will also be working with the city manager. And so we just wanted to make sure that the city manager's role with respect to those two roles, but also city council was clearly spelled out in the management of those two roles within the city. In order to ensure that we're not in the situation where we have a lot of outdated language, we recommend a 10-year charter review process, and that's something that the National Civic League also recommends for cities. A couple of the other changes that we think are important to move through is that we enhance the budgeting procedures and transparency by updating submission dates, required information, the amount and number of public hearings that would take place, and how the budget amendment and adoption processes worked. So we did spend a substantial amount of time getting recommendations from city staff and city council to ensure that the recommendations we were putting forth here accurately reflected what's been going on a regular basis. And then lastly, we wanted to ensure that there was language that would improve governmental accountability through updates relating to any sort of investigation procedures that would take place, and then also the availability of public records. So again, just ensuring that the public knows that they are able to have access to information about what's going on at the city.
Okay. If I might add, too, the entire charter is only 19 pages. Here's a copy of it. You can probably read it in 45 minutes. The words that are added or deleted are in red, so they're easy to spot versus the black and white print, which is the existing language. Copies of this are available at the City Hall here, and I believe it's also posted on the web page. You can read it at your leisure. So you might want to take a look at what's specifically in here, and they go by articles, so if you have a specific interest on maybe the budget, you just go to the budget article and it's there. So you might want to take a look at that, and it may give you some additional information you need. So.
Based on the question, some of our audience members have certainly read it, but we're going to start with a general question. And this is probably a little bit subjective. What is the most significant change in the charter?
I think there isn't a significant change, really. What we did was update the charter. If this charter doesn't pass, the existing one stays in effect. And I don't think you'll notice a lot of major change in how city government operates. You're still going to have the same number of city council people. You'll have a mayor. You'll have a city manager. It's simply to update things. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Doctor?
No, I would say, if anything, as you're looking through the red line changes or the track changes version of the city charter, you might see where there's chunks that are taken out, and a lot of times we just found that those really weren't relevant. They're things that should be included in an ordinance. They're not really appropriate for a charter, or we simply were just trying to make that language as clear and succinct as possible. So again, I would just mimic, we don't have a lot of drastic changes taking place.
I mean, there are issues that may come up from time to time, but we did not address them, such as voting by wards, things like that. We thought that those kinds of issues were standalone issues that should be held for a later election on that specific issue and not tied to the specific existing charter language.
Section 208 deals with the clerk, and I'll just read the question because I think it covers, a couple people have asked about that piece. Please clarify the intent behind the city attorney and city clerk being managed by the city manager, when historically these three employees have always been independently appointed and reported directly to the city council.
This language reflects what we understand is actually taking place, where the city manager will nominate a city attorney or a city clerk, and then it's up to the city council to decide, do they want this person? If they don't want this person as the city manager, as the city clerk or the city attorney, they simply don't confirm them. And they're not confirmed, and there'll have to be another selection made at a later time. Simply what the state does on confirmation processes for their offices that are required for that, and what the feds are doing right now with the cabinet.
Yeah, so part of our rationale too with that is taking into account what happens on a daily basis. So our members of council have full-time positions themselves, and so oftentimes it is the city manager who's engaging with them as well. So we wanted to make sure that that type of language reflecting those current practices were also in there, but still, of course, reflect the fact that those two positions do serve council as well.
Next question is about Section 209. Shouldn't the council be responsible for investigations?
There's a constitutional problem there. They can't be both the prosecutor and the judge. The original language, they were supposed to investigate, and then they would decide based on their investigation whether there was action warranted or not. That is not going to pass too many court challenges. So what we did was we changed the language to have a third party conduct the investigation. Could be a retired DCI agent or somebody, whoever they want to hire, and then the city council, based on that investigation, will make its decision.
In Section 4, Why remove the city manager's responsibility to report the financial condition versus just advise the council? So language change.
Could you repeat that?
Yep, it's page 10 of the red line document. Why remove, well, is that right? Section 4.8, so a little bit deeper maybe. Why remove the city manager's responsibility to report the financial condition versus just advise the council?
Because it's in another part of the charter. It was duplicative. Yeah, you can find that at now section 5.09, where it says copies of the budget, capital improvement plan, independent audits, and appropriation and revenue ordinances shall be public records and shall be made available to the public at suitable places in the city, including the city's official website. It's actually what the language that's in there now is broader than what we moved, but we tried to avoid redundancies.
Yeah, so you'll just see that with section 4.8, we're just kind of vaguely talking about the city manager's role, so we can more specifically spell it out later.
I will note that I am running light on questions, and I can always fill for time, but if you have questions, now's a good time to get your paper in. Should the city adopt more alternative dispute resolution processes?
That is probably a decision for the city council. And one thing is that you probably wouldn't want something like that in this document because you have to have an citywide election that's going to take you 6 months just to change the process. Leave it to the city council to fill in the blanks through their ordinances. And if they want to go through those expanded procedures, more power to them. But it probably shouldn't be in this document.
Yeah, so we were very cognizant of the fact that you all did not elect us. And so we wanted to make sure that we were putting forth recommendations to the city council that would really structure the processes and procedures that are taking place. So if there were more specific things such as this suggestion, then the city council would be able to put those in place and that everyone would know that's something that could be done via an ordinance.
Maybe just generally, why is home rule important?
I think it expands the city's prerogatives as far as what they can do and what they can't do. If you look at the South Dakota law as far as what a municipality can do, it's pretty limited. And what this does is allow the city to do everything that the state law, only thing they can't do is what the state law says, thou shalt not. And so it gives the city a lot more leeway. And there are 15 cities in South Dakota that have home rule. Most of them are of the size of the Brookings. I think Sioux Falls is the largest, but cities with probably more active city governments find it way easier to function and to also then more promptly act as issues come up rather than going, uh-oh, state law doesn't allow us to do this. I guess we can't. What are we going to do now? Well, the real question for the city of Brookings is, state law doesn't prohibit it, so should we do it?
Just for clarity, the other cities in South Dakota who have a home rule charter include Aberdeen, Beersford, Elk Point, Faith, Fort Pierre, Sioux Falls, Springfield, Vermilion, and Watertown. You talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but the 10 years, why every 10 years, and maybe what kind of things, maybe give some examples of that, what would happen outside of that 10 years or within that 10 years before this process proceeds again?
One problem we ran into initially as a committee is that this was done in 2002. Unfortunately, we can't find anybody that worked on that. I'm afraid a number of them are deceased or they moved away. So we can't go to them and say, why did you do this? So we're left to kind of ponder. We thought 10 years was a fair amount of time. You can't be doing it every 6 months, but also it needs to be fairly frequent, and so we picked 10 years. And it could be sooner. The city council can, through those ways I told them, amending the charter, you could do it every 6 months if you wanted to, but I don't think you do. So 10 years is an arbitrary choice.
You don't think your committee wants to be continually ongoing for lifetime appointments to this process? Eventually, those meetings would get pretty stale, I think.
You might not have much of a committee left.
Yeah. Yes.
Luckily, things look pretty good, so I don't think we'll have too many issues. A lot of the things that were brought to us can definitely be spelled out in an ordinance.
If folks have questions, not today, I mean, these people obviously have had a chance to ask questions, but what's left in the process maybe before that April 8th election?
Well, we plan to make ourselves available to any organizations that wish to have us come and make a presentation like we just did. We're available there. You can also call, I think the number we were given is 692-6281, which I assume is a city number of some sorts, right? Okay, thank you. And they will attempt to answer your question or find the answer for you.
We're going to call this our last question. And I think the answer is probably something that Dr. Hager mentioned in terms of you weren't elected. This isn't this type of document. But should the city adopt policies to encourage a more diverse population? If so, are formal changes okay, or does this document reflect any of that?
I guess my question would be, what exactly does the question asker mean by that particular question? And, you know, in my opinion, we're looking at the roles and responsibilities of city government when we are laying out what's in the charter. And so to me, those types of things seem like issues that should be addressed by the city council and be taken through an ordinance.
And if I could read the preamble, which sets the stage for the entire charter, we added this language. It says, by this action, the city of Brookings will acknowledge inclusive community participation, inclusive city participation, as an integral part of effective and trusted governments. We thought that pretty well said it all.
Well, in the interest of that said it all, do you have any closing comments today? Yes, there will be. Yep, I got it. Yep.
Yeah, just, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us or some of our other committee members that you saw up on the screen. Everybody would be more than happy to answer your questions and address any other concerns that you may have.
Okay. Please remember to vote.
Yeah, so a couple of closing things from me. Thank you to the two of you for representing the commission today, and for our commission members in the audience, thank you for your service on this. As Sherry mentioned, we've got handouts, so there's a frequently asked questions and some other things on the back table if you are interested. As the Chief Justice mentioned, April 8th is the city election, so that will likely be city council and school board as well. So that's your next opportunity to exercise your democratic feelings, but democracy does depend on an engaged citizenry, and so I appreciate your being here today and assume that if you are here today, that we can count on you voting in some way, shape, or fashion around the April 8th election. So thank you very much for your attendance today, and have a great weekend. Thanks.